Hi, I'm Hazel, and today I'm taking you on a tour through the types of macros that I use the most. If you are new to macros, they are a feature that allows you to combine multiple WoW actions onto a single button, along with letting you be more specific with targeting. That's a very basic version of it, but it's the beginning. You are still limited by the GCD, so you cannot just put your entire rotation onto one macro and just press that one button. You can still do a surprising amount with them though. To start, you can access your macro list by typing /macro or just /m. You'll have account-wide macros that are per account, and then some character-specific macros. They give you 120 general slots and then 18 more per character. When writing macros or copying them from other sources, it is very important that there are no typos and that it is formatted correctly. If your macro doesn't work like you expect it to, triple check the spelling and formatting. One space out of place can kill it. So the first category to show you would be everyday combat macros, and to start, here is a standard combo macro for activating multiple spells at once. For example, the Mag'har Orc Racial Ancestral Call along with a DPS cooldown such as True Shot Aura. This works because Ancestral Call is not on the GCD. Keep in mind that if you have more than one spell that is on the GCD in a macro, the second one will not trigger unless you double press it within one global, one GCD per macro. My next type of combat macro is a Mouseover Macro, and these are the ones I have the most of. I use these for healing and friendly spells. With this targeting text in the macro to specify that it happens at my mouse over, I don't need to actually target the player to cast a spell on them. All I have to do is mouse over their frame or their model, and then press the key to cast the spell on that player. You can get the same thing done with an add-on. Most people, I would say, use add-ons for this, but I like my macros. They don't need updating every patch. And this is not just for healers. I use Mouseover Macros for my life grip on my priest, for example. Most of the time you're going to be mousing over frames, but in a pinch you can mouse over player models directly in the world. That can go a bit wonky in clumps of people, but if there's just like one person that's crawling their way towards you through fire and you don't have time to figure out their name, it really does the trick to just kind of mouse over life grip them. On a healing character, I have a macro like this for every single one of my healing spells, so that if I'm healing in a dungeon or whatever, I don't need to worry about switching targets based on who I'm healing, and I can very quickly dole them out to whoever needs them. This also lets you keep your target free for, targeting the boss to keep an eye on what he's casting, that kind of thing. The next type of macro that I use are shift mod macros. Now, you can use any type of modifier that you like, but I usually stick with shift or maybe alt. This is for when you have too many buttons. With a macro written like this, pressing the button casts one spell, but holding down shift and then pressing the button casts a different spell. I like to group similar buttons together. For example, this button is Freezing Trap, and then shift in the same button would be Tar Trap. Beware of forgetting about the button that is hidden under the shift mod though, that can happen to me. Alternately, sometimes I will use modifier macros for the same spell but a different target. This is mostly for arena. I'll press the button to cast a spell at my target, and then shift in the button to cast it at my focus target. If you've been struggling to find comfy keys to bind stuff to, modifier macros are what you need. And one more quick note on this, if you do set up a modifier macro and the keybind for it is not working, check your existing keybinds to make sure there isn't already something on that modifier key plus whatever button you put it on. So for example, maybe you made a shift mod macro and put it on your 5 key, and it works fine without shift, but as soon as you press shift, it won't work anymore. What you want to do is go into your keybinds and make sure that you don't have shift 5 already bound to something. What I do is just bind it and unbind it really quickly, so bind shift 5 to something arbitrary and then remove it to clear up that keybind so that your macro now works. I also use a couple of @player macros, and this is for anything that is ground placed that you want to put specifically at your feet like all the time. I use this for my angelic feather on my priest because I'm selfish and I very rarely want to share, so whenever I press this macro, it's going to put the feather down at my feet, which automatically uses it on me. Another good one is the @cursor macro, and this is for anything that is ground placed that you would rather put at your cursor location. I use this for efflorescence on my resto druid. The reason this is nice is because you get to just kind of mouse over wherever you want it, press the button, and it's down. It eliminates the second click that you usually get between placing the reticle and then actually casting the spell. You get to do it much faster just with a simple cursor macro. Of course, this means that you want to be a little bit more careful about where you're putting them because it's not going to let you preview where it's going, it's just going to cast right at your cursor. You can also get fancy and do a shift mod here. For example, maybe you're a Death Knight, and unmodified, your button will cast Death and Decay on yourself. And then if you modify it with holding down shift, for example, you could cast Death and Decay at your cursor location. That way you're not locked into one or the other, and both options will make your spell go off faster by removing an extra click from your life. I know clicks are fast and this does not sound like a big deal, but you do them so many times in WoW that it does add up. A macro that I use quite often in raids or dungeons would be the raid marker macros. This is a macro that can put skull or any marker that you like on your target depending on which number you have in this spot in the macro right here. This is very nice in dungeons to just have one button that will put skull on your target, especially if you're tanking. If you want people to focus a specific target and you're not in voice with them, there's really no better way to get that done. But even if you're not tanking, it is nice to have handy. Of course, this will only work if you are either group leader or group assistant, or it'll also work ungrouped, but then you're just marking things for yourself. Along similar lines, I also have macros for ground markers. This is a very basic one. You could just type /WM and then a space and then the number for the one you want. That's your world marker macro, and that's very good for marking ground targets. Very handy in raids, and once again will only work if you have a leader or assist. The other one I used quite a bit in raids was a countdown macro for DBM countdowns and breaks, etc. In Shadowlands, we are getting in-game support for countdowns, so even if you don't use an add-on, you'll be able to write macros for specific durations. You know, just have like one button on your bar that you can press for a 10-second pull timer, for example. Moving on to the general category, this is an example of a use spam macro. So this is for when you just need to spam use like a billion things and there's no GCD on it. For example, in Najatar we have cleaning the dirty murloc socks, or maybe you've bought a bunch of fish and you want to turn all of it into fish oil. You type /use space and the name of the thing, copy that, and then just paste it on as many lines as you can fit it, typically 13. There's going to be a little bit of lag when you use this macro, but the idea is that you can basically mash the button and get 13 uses out of each button, as opposed to having to just wear out your poor tendons, you know, mashing the mouse button for each individual one. Here's one that people ask me about now and then. This is my extra action button macro. This is just a very easy way to keybind your extra action button, which is the big thing that pops up, for example, like using your cloak when fighting the last two bosses of Ny'alotha. Now, you could also just set up a keybind for that the old-fashioned way in your keybinding menu, but I like using a macro because it comes up often enough that I want to use a pretty primo keybind for it, but since it's on a macro, I can easily move it around or just temporarily stash it on another bar in case I need that keybind for something else. That might be just a me thing, but that is what I do. We also have target macros. This is a very useful and common use for macros. I will use this for finding NPCs such as rares. I just keep one find macro, and then every time I'm looking for somebody different, I'll just switch the name out. All you need here is /tar, space, and the name. You can add in a line as well to mark them with a raid marker if you like. That is especially helpful when looking for a vendor in town because you can kind of see the raid marker through a building. Another thing I like to do is macro in toys to commonly used spells to kind of just like make things more fun. Any toy that is not on the GCD can be safely macroed into other abilities. For example, I have my Prismatic Bauble toy that gives me a rainbow trail behind me. I macro that into movement skills like Heroic Leap or Angelic Feather or Powerward Shield, so that whenever I'm moving fast, I've also got rainbows behind me. Similarly, I have my Thaumaturgist orb macroed into my Mind Flay so that is happening on cooldown. Worth noting that this will generate some error text. You'll get the you can't use that yet because it's going to be trying to trigger your toy before it's off cooldown. I use Leatrix Plus to hide my error text, and that kind of solves that spam problem, although use with caution just because every now and then there's an error that I can't figure out because the text isn't showing up. Another macro that I really like is my Disenchanting Macro, and that looks like this. So I craft linen bracers and I want to disenchant a ton of them. That's how I've made a fair amount of gold in this expansion, but I do not want to be manually hunting through my bags for each bracer to mouse over. I am known to accidentally disenchant my actual gear, and the poor item restore tool has seen me enough. So instead, I use this macro that has /cast disenchant, followed by /use and some item IDs. So these are the item IDs of the specific bracers I'm crafting that I want to disenchant. You don't need to worry about the affixes, you don't need to worry about the of the fire flash or whatever, as long as you have the basic version of it, that will work. And you can look up the ID for the item that you want the macro to disenchant by looking that item up on Wowhead, and then pulling the ID out of the URL and slotting it into your macro. I've got a couple of items in here, mostly claw stuff, but some epic plate as well, I think. But the nice thing about this is it's one button that you can just press over and over again to disenchant any of those items that you have in your bags, but it will never disenchant anything that is not specifically written into the macro. Let's see, what else? I have a details toggle macro. This is a little bit niche, but I am a details user, and this is the easiest way for me to just kind of quickly show or hide the window. I don't like having my damage meters up all the time because sometimes you just don't want to know, you know? Another thing that you can do with macros is you can also add chat or emotes into them. You can take any macro at all and just add a line of chat or emote if you want it to say something when you use it. Once upon a time, I had a macro that had a /yell, "Hi, I'm Hazel," macroed into a warrior's charge, and then I would use that in PvP, and it would go off a lot because I mashed the button quite a bit. The yell will happen each time you press the button, regardless of whether the ability goes off, so if you are, a button masher, you're gonna get a lot of that chat line. Similarly, you can add an orange line of emote text by /E, and then the thing that you want to put in emote text. If you've ever seen people in town doing things like their pets nuzzling up to them, that could be an add-on, but it can also be accomplished via a macro. And those are the macros that I use the most. Thank you so much for watching, share your life-changing macro concepts that I have missed in the comments, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye.